Do you have a specific design philosophy?
Yes, but we don't push it hard because the team in the office who's responsible for the execution of that project ultimately is also responsible for the approach and the design philosophy for that project. So if you looked at all the projects, they're not going to look and feel the same. But what you are going to see is a tremendous amount of time spent listening to clients, asking great questions, and then giving them resulting projects that are a response to that process.
Hello, everybody. This is the Winning in Winnipeg podcast, where I talk to top performing business owners, executives, entrepreneurs, athletes, and local Winnipeg celebrities. I get to learn who they are and how they think, and I get to hear their perspective about what's really going on in Winnipeg and in their businesses. On today's podcast, I have the pleasure of speaking with Shane Solomon, president and founder at Republic Architecture. Shane was educated at the University of Manitoba and the Technical University of Berlin. He is a principal and senior architectural professional with decades of experience in planning and implementation, as well as a proven track record in building design, analysis, and procurement. Republic Architecture is a multidisciplinary design firm focused on cultural, educational, and institutional projects that positively impact our communities. Their firm has delivered architectural solutions all over Canada, from the northernmost Canadian civilian community in Grise Fjord. Am I saying that right?
You got it.
Nice. Nunavut. To the rocky cliffs of Atlantic Canada and all the way over to Dawson City in the Yukon. Shane, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we talked about it a little bit before. Tell me a little more about just why it's been so hard to get you on. You've been flying all over the place.
I have. Our clients are pretty evenly spread across Canada. And so my work will take me to markets for the day to meet with clients about new projects. So in the last couple of weeks, I was in St. John's, Newfoundland for a morning, Halifax for an afternoon. I have to go to Vancouver for the day. My day-to-day often involves travel, but I get to sleep in my own bed at night, which is nice.
How many active projects do you guys have at the moment?
We've completed about 800 at this point. Active right now that there's work going on, probably about 150, somewhere between 150 and 170. And they'll range in scale from an office fit up, for a Crown Corporation, to maybe $500 million new build. So it really depends. And some of those projects can take many years and would be at different phases. In their construction or design.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's good.
How many employees does Republic Architecture?
We're a team of about 62. We've got 60 people here in Winnipeg. We have one person in Quebec and one person in Ontario.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And any other bases, geographical bases, or is it just based in Winnipeg?
We do our work out of here.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
The only reason we have those other offices, and we do like having them, is that they were individuals who were here who needed to move to other markets and wanted to stay on. Mm-hmm. So we had someone move to Montreal, and we had someone move to Toronto when they asked to stay on. And so we have them working in small offices in those markets.
Yeah. Well, Zoom has really picked up over the last few years.
Oh, for sure. I mean, COVID in some ways was really great for us because our clients allowed us to do things virtually, and we learned to design virtually, even large-scale projects, which was really nice, and that's carried over. So if you're looking for positive things that came out of COVID, that was one for us.
Yeah. Did that change your travel?
It did. It was great. Yeah. I mean, in 2019, I probably traveled 50 trips, which is basically one a week, and almost all of those were day travel. I only probably slept out 5 nights of those 50.
All right. Yeah.
But by March of 2020, clients would allow me to meet with them virtually. We could send a drone to look at buildings, and they were comfortable with that.
Oh, crazy.
Which was great, actually.
Yeah.
So, not a mandatory visit or a face-to-face meeting. There was a level of comfort with us doing things virtually, even on the front end, which is where I spend most of my time meeting with clients to talk about a project. And then you realize after the fact, you need to stand on this greenfield site in the middle of nowhere to build an institutional building.
Yeah.
We could probably do that virtually.
Yeah.
So it's been nice having to travel less. It's picked up a bit again, but it's nothing like it was in 2019.
No kidding. Founded 2010, right?
Yeah.
Let's dive in a little before that with some background. So Born and raised in Winnipeg?
Born and raised in Winnipeg.
Okay. Take me through a little bit of, finishing up high school. Did you know of a direction? What did it look like for you at that time?
Yeah, my trajectory to become an architect is a bit atypical. So I grew up in North Winnipeg, and I actually graduated from Garden City Collegiate, and I was a decent student and went into university right out of high school. I was pretty strong in science and actually started in physics, and then ended up graduating with an undergraduate degree in science with a major in microbiology.
Okay.
But during that degree, decided I probably didn't want to continue in anything related to that, and had an interest in architecture. I used to meander through the School of Architecture when I was a student. Yeah. And I ended up, they used to have a gallery where they would have a rotating gallery maybe once a month where they would exhibit students' work or traveling work. And so I would always go and look at it. And one day I just decided to walk into the office there, and there was a student advisor there, and I sat with them wanting to apply to an undergraduate in architecture. And then she realized through the conversation that I was already a student who was about to graduate, and said, you can apply to a master's degree in architecture. It's a professional program like law or, a doctoral, like to become a medical doctor. And so she said, you don't have to have an undergraduate in a related field. And so if you don't mind, if you want to, I'll reach out to the school next door and you can go speak with someone. So she made a phone call, and I ended up meeting with the head of the faculty and the dean as just a walk-in. And they told me what to do to apply, and I applied, and I got into a master's of architecture. And that's how I became, that was my that's how my architectural schooling started, is a master's of architecture. So that's all I have in a kind of related field. So in some way, I've missed out on all of the undergraduate design experience, which is pretty comprehensive. Yeah. But I think I have a bit of a different perspective when it comes to the education that a bunch of other architects have, just because my trajectory was so different.
No kidding. I always thought, or when I speak with people about architecture, that it's kind of like the mix between math and science and art, kind of all combined together. What is it about architecture that, if you were to have to disseminate it and explain it, how would you approach it?
I actually think architectural education is pretty generalist. So you have to have kind of the math and science and technical stuff, and you have to have the kind of creative arty as well. And the education itself, I think, is intentionally generalist. So it's pretty comprehensive. You take a lot of classes, and it's a lot of time. And I think they try to get your hands in a lot of things without actually teaching you how to be an architect, but just teaching you a lot about design. I think you actually learn about how to practice architecture in practice once you get out of school. But it is quite a mixed bag in architectural education. And it's really, I don't think I realized it at the time, but I actually got a lot out of it.
So it sounds like they're trying not to fit everyone into a box and just say, this is how you do architecture.
I think they are intentionally not trying to fit you into a box. And architectural education is not often taught by practitioners. So many of those people have never actually practiced architecture. They've only taught it. And so they're not teaching you practical things. They're teaching you they're kind of teaching you design think, how to think like a designer, which touches on a lot of things. And so whether it's how to draw or how to explore a design problem, there's a lot of that kind of speak that happens at school. And I think they intentionally try to keep it pretty broad. So you can find your own path.
Yeah. Did you have did you work at all? Did you have any other jobs either during school or after school?
I worked at different summer camps in different markets, which was fun. I did a little bit of bartending, mostly for the benefit. I bartended at a hotel, and my wife and I, my now wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, liked to travel. So that way we could travel as employees.
Very smart.
Which was huge. It was huge. So I did that. I don't know that I have great bartending skills, but it was a great gig. So I did a lot of that. And then I got my first architecture-related job. I was actually fairly young at the time, working for the Winnipeg School Division. They used to have their own internal architecture and design team because they have something like 80 buildings.
Yeah.
And I worked there for the summers, and it was a great gig.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you always consider yourself entrepreneurial? Was that something that you ever thought about growing up, or was it kind of, it just came out of nowhere?
I think it came by accident. I think if you ask people who know me, they might have told you I was always entrepreneurial, but I didn't know people who ran businesses for the most part. I mean, my family are all educators. My parents are educators. My sister's an educator. Even my extended family are educators. They taught in public school for the most part. So I didn't know any architects. And I didn't know a lot of business owners. I knew some business owners, but I think I went into architecture thinking that I was a designer. And I probably started my professional career that way, but it flipped quite quickly to taking on a more of a managerial role, and then one where I was responsible at the front end. And I don't know if I got there by accident or nobody else wanted to do it and I was reasonably good at it. So it may have started that way, but I enjoy it the most of all of the elements of practice. I do enjoy the kind of management of the practice the most, for sure.
Yeah. Was there ever an actual moment that you can remember when Republic Architecture kind of, the idea formed, or was it this slow brewing thing that happened?
If you ask my wife, she'll say it was slow brewing. I just didn't recognize it. But I actually think I was pretty focused on being an architect when I was a fairly green architect. I enjoyed going to work every day, and I worked really long hours, probably, at least 12 hours a day, I would say. And I wanted to learn as much about the practice as I could. The firm that I worked at was very good to me. So I want to preface it with that. They were very good to me. And I think whatever I wanted to take on, they would allow me to do. There was no limits to what I wanted to take on. And at some point, maybe it was my kind of youth or foolishness, but I would just stop asking to take things on and just take them on. So at some point, taking on management of the firm or some level of management of the firm, if it took the burden off others, it was great. If I wanted to spend the time doing it, they were happy to allow me to do that.
Yeah.
And then there was definitely a moment where I recognized that this wasn't going to be a fit for me longer term. And someone externally who I was sitting with having a conversation said, "You haven't come to this conclusion yet, but you need to go start a practice." Wow. And I was quite young at the time and almost blew the comment off.
Yeah.
But then I spoke to my wife about it, my father about it, and they were very supportive. And I just stepped out with no clients and no projects, nothing. I left the practice that I was at to start Republic from scratch, just sitting in a room, figuring out just one day, how's this going to work?
Insane.
Yeah.
So you start it, what's the first steps you take?
So I resigned my position. I remember this well. My last day was July 31st. I remember my wife and I went on vacation the next day for a week.
Okay.
When we came back, she went to work the next day. I remember I got up, and I'm a fairly formal person. I don't typically wear a t-shirt. I'm most comfortable in a sports jacket or a suit.
Yeah.
I had no job. And so I started Republic in theory. I haven't really had set anything up yet. And I got up in the morning and I remember I showered and I got dressed like in my work clothes. And I walked into the second bedroom of our place. We didn't have kids at the time. Yeah. And just sat down at a table, which was just a blank white table, not different than what you're sitting at now, with nothing on it, and being like, okay, let's figure this thing out.
Crazy.
Yeah. And then I came up with the name and registered it. And then I spent probably a month just looking for the right opportunity. Every day I would just search for the right opportunity. Then I think I found one where I was like, oh, I see what this client wants, and I think I could be successful in landing this and executing on it. And so then I dedicated my time probably for the next 4 weeks of just focusing on that one project with the hopes of landing it.
Yeah, yeah. Did you know anything about marketing, branding, process systems, anything like that is the general makeup of managing a company?
At a really high level only.
Okay.
Even our marketing would be probably atypical compared to most design firms in this market, I think. I mean, we don't show 90% of the work we do. And my knowledge of marketing at the time was pretty weak, I would say, though I was responsible for the acquisition of work at the firm I came out of. So it does help because I had enough rounded practice experience that I could meet with a client and hear what they were saying and then be able to respond where they, I think, trusted that I would be able to actually execute. So I had a bit of that. But in terms of process and operations, not a clue. I also had no staff.
Yeah. Why do you think that you were successful?
Well, I'm going to say some of it has to be luck. It has to be luck. So I started this company in early August. I pursued the first opportunity in late September, and I didn't hear about it, right? So this was a major project. I responded to the RFP, and then it just goes into the abyss. The client's not going to respond the next day. And the likelihood of me winning it, I thought was still low. I don't have a proven track record of doing anything. I thought was my best opportunity. Yeah. I pursued another opportunity in October, November, and then another one in November, December. So I pursued 3 opportunities over a 4-month period. And I ended up landing all 3.
Wow.
All in the same week.
I can see the problems that come up with this.
So, suddenly you have clients who have responded that they've accepted your proposal, and some of them can be open for 90 days, and you go into some contract negotiations. These were all quality-based selection proposals, so it wasn't a number on a page. And I was allowed to negotiate the contracts for all 3. So within a 1-week period, I had 3 major projects with, over 7 digits of revenue coming in the door, which I'm already in theory in contract for. So the next issue is I need team members.
Yeah, how do we fulfill this?
Yes.
I love when new problems come. It's just like, okay, this is a good problem.
Absolutely.
I mean, if I'm putting myself in your shoes, landing some big projects, now we got to fulfill. So kind of in scramble mode ish, we'll say, right? Very, very strategic scramble mode, we'll say. But how has Republic architecture evolved in the way that you look at it? Has the vision always stayed the same? Mission statement, has it evolved at all?
The answer, it's for sure evolved. I mean, it's growing up. I still think of us as a startup. We're in our 14th fiscal year, so I don't, we're kind of like an awkward teenager at this point. It's like an awkward teenage. And we're going through a real growth spurt. We have been over the last couple of years. But I think in our core values in terms of the kind of clients we want to have and what we're like as a practice hasn't really changed that much. We focus a lot on our people and really playing into the interests of the individuals in the office. We spend a tremendous amount of time figuring out if someone's a cultural fit for us. So the CV will get you across the table, and then we likely don't look at it again. And you're probably having 3 separate interviews with the team. One is a 360. Depending on what the role is, it may be with a whole bunch of people that you would be executing on a project with. And we figure out if we think those people are best fit. We've always done that. And I think that served us well. I think that our team feels pretty cohesive that way, which is nice.
Yeah.
And we figure out what people want to do, and then we go pursue those opportunities. Their wants often fit well with the what the firm is pursuing. So that it's rare that there's a big conflict between what a professional wants to be doing and what kind of the mandate of the firm is.
Yeah. You mentioned culture. Is that something that you gave thought to, or is it something that kind of just happened because of how you guys were operating?
I think culture has been, when I was sitting alone in that August of 2010, culture was the biggest thing that came into play, which is funny because I had no people to work with and no space.
Yeah.
But I think if you're going to dedicate your career in professional service, you're spending a lot of time at the office with other people. And so the culture of that company matters a lot. And if I was to be critical of, our industry, I would say that the design, the culture of the offices in the design industry can be challenging. And if you've got all kinds of runway in terms of career in front of you, you want to work in a firm where you feel valued and you have opportunity to grow, and you jump out of bed every morning to go to work, because otherwise it's really hard to perform and be at your best. So I think culture has been there since day one. Even when I didn't know who the right client was, I knew the kind of firm we wanted to be.
Nice. I like that. As the founder, what's the most important thing to you when you think about your employees?
You want to pick one thing?
We can do 3.
I think it really matters that our team feels valued and that they're being challenged and that they're being supported. The team has gotten bigger. I think that I was, for sure in the first years, really good at asking questions and listening, probably better than I am now. So I would do my best to suss out what people actually wanted to do and what experiences they wanted to have. And then I would go and bring those experiences to them. And so, if you as a colleague of mine who are a professional architect or interior designer or engineer or whatever your role is, say, I really want to have this experience. I want to learn this. I want to contribute to our community in this way. And I have the ability potentially to bring that opportunity to them. I get a lot of fulfillment from that. And then seeing the team actually doing the work they want to do is great.
Well, they have a voice, it sounds like.
Well, how can you not have a voice? I mean, we're just a collection of people. So it's just, ultimately, I just sell professional service. I don't have any goods to sell. We don't have any product. It's just people. And so the firm is really defined by what our resources, what our people actually want to do. And sometimes people don't know what they want to do. You kind of get to know them and you're like, there's this opportunity. And I think if we could land it, I'd like to see you take it on. What do you think of that? And sometimes we get it right and they're like, oh my God, that was the best experience ever. And other times they're like, I hate this. And I'm like, please carry it through or we'll pivot you into something else.
Yeah.
So we spend a lot of time doing that.
Yeah. What are have you noticed common misconceptions about architects or architecture firms for the general public?
Oh, maybe. I think, well, we're weird to begin with. So I think we're a different kind of firm. We're just different. So when someone joins our office, the more senior you are, the more seasoned you are in your career, the more culture shock you're going to have. I don't care how much you want it or how great a fit you are, you're going to have culture shock. If you've been doing it for 20 years, you're going to have culture shock for months because we're that different.
In what way? How would you explain that?
We don't have a lot of hierarchy.
Okay.
You're really empowered as a professional. So we're a professional heavy office. We have a lot of professionals in our office without necessarily a lot of support. And what I mean by support, I mean, we don't have, we're not heavy on admin staff or technical staff or people who are there to, I'll pivot that response maybe to say that the individuals take a lot on themselves and teams are built ad hoc. So if we're taking on a major capital project, you might have 10 team members building it together. They may all be senior people and they're figuring out what piece of the pie each of them is going to take on. There's a lot of conversation back and forth. And it's not a senior person sketching something on a napkin and passing it to somebody else and saying, execute on this, and then those people disseminating it. We don't operate that way at all.
Okay.
And I think...
is that the norm?
I don't know if it's
What'd
the
you
norm.
think?
I
Or-
haven't been in another practice in a while.
Yeah.
But we're 60 odd people we represent every firm almost every firm in Winnipeg, because people have joined us from other practices. We only have about 4 or 5 individuals where we're their first practice office experience. They come from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so they tell us what it was like at their practice, so that we, not to gossip or to kind of spread negativity, to figure out, it's often like, well, this is how we did it at this practice, so we can better understand how to help them get over the culture shock of the new office, where it's a little more kumbaya.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a badge of honor with having others within the same industry coming over and saying, this is nice over here.
Well, I mean, we're different. And so if you're looking for something different, we're maybe on your radar.
Right.
Right? If you're a professional interior designer and you're working somewhere and you're like, this is good, but I'm looking for something different, looking for something more, or just, I want to pivot.
Yep.
People will reach out to us, which is great. We are spoiled in the way that we have a tremendous number of applicants in the firm, and they tend to be of really diverse backgrounds. And it creates, it's nice to have people reach out so that you can sit with them and figure out, hey, are you a fit for us? Or are we a fit for you? And start that process.
Yeah. Well, it gives a lot of different perspectives when you're attacking a new project.
For sure.
Yeah, that's great. 2-part question. Thinking back to starting it up, you alone at your table, versus now. Think about what were the hardest things, the biggest obstacles that you had to overcome then versus what you're facing right now?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, when I was a real startup, finding colleagues. Now, I just told you it's easy. People, if you look at our careers page, we might get 200 applicants a month. It's a bit silly.
Oh, wow.
Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's a great fit. Out of those 200 applicants, it only might be 3 that are a great fit. And we may only be looking for 1 person to fill a need. So that's a problem to have, because you really want to spend the time and invest in finding who the best people are.
It's like an in-house HR. That's a full-time job.
It is, but then the truth is that kind of the team itself wants to really spend the time to figure out who those right people are. So we're not willing to give that up.
Right.
So many of the key people in our firm, and by key people, I mean the people who are interested in really spending the time to figure out who the right fit are always looking at that page and being like, okay, let's bring this one in. We don't always pick the same people either, which is good too.
Yeah.
But you're not a known entity when you're a startup. I mean, nobody knew who Republic was. And so how are you going to find team members? How are you? I mean, it was great. I landed 3 projects and you've got, millions of dollars of potential revenue coming in the door, but you have nobody to execute on it. And there's not a chance that you as an individual can do that. So then it was about finding people who buy into this. And I was lucky in the fact that that happened. And I didn't know any of these people, which I think is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that I knew, I didn't really reach out to, but our current COO, our COO of our office, is the first person to join the firm. And I didn't know him. He met me at an event and we had a conversation. And then he followed up and said, can I join what you have going on? And the person who's our heritage lead now, who was the second person to join the firm, did the same thing. And so that's the way we've been growing. And I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't think I'm out there saying, come join what we have going on. I think we've just been lucky, or maybe it was timing. Maybe it was just like you met the right people at the right time and they joined and it kind of worked out really well.
A synchronicity. everything kind of came together
For sure.
all at once.
For sure. I think now, very different challenges.
Yeah.
Very different challenges. No matter, I would say that I feel really supported by the team. So, there's a lot going on in the firm, but we have incredible people who are taking on so much of it that, as the firm continues to grow, it's like, it's like a block of Swiss cheese. Like suddenly you expand and there's the same amount of mass, and here's the scientist in me, and there's like these holes, and I just fill the holes, basically. Like I'm the hole filler. So that's what I do in my day to day, and I'm willing to take on the stuff that others don't know how to do, because I've gotten very comfortable in that gray area of like, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to do my best to figure it out. And I have great resources around me, and I'll reach out to industry and figure stuff out. And that is great for me because I'm constantly growing myself.
So as the present CEO, where do you find that you get the biggest return on investment for your time and focus? Is that looking for gray areas? Is that investing in people? Is that looking at systems and processes? Like, where do you get the biggest return?
I think on the kind of strategy, figuring out what our market niches are, and figuring out what's actually happening. Like our market is Canada for the most part, though at this point it's moving to be, I'm going to say global, with a Canadian interest in some way, and figuring out what's happening in our industry, and finding out those opportunities where we can push in hard into markets, whether it's a specific location or with a specific client or a new typology, figuring out what those are and then figuring out how to push into those, I think is maybe a strength of mine. And I'm probably getting best return on investment there because I'm feeling like that market is underserved. Nobody's doing that type of building. Or the three who did it all merged together. And so it's time for them to have a competitor. That's served me well for the last number of years. Let's say 3 years, I've been spending a lot of time doing that. Merger and acquisition of design firms that are larger. So, more than 50 people, more than $10 million, those kinds of firms. And for the most part, we really only compete against those kinds of firms. There's so much merger and acquisition happening all over the place that there are fewer and fewer players all of the time. And so if you knew the three players and they became one player,
Only one competitor.
There's only one competitor.
Right. Yeah.
And they're busy figuring out how to work together.
Yeah.
So your odds keep jumping in those scenarios. I actually love hearing about merger and acquisition because that kind of that changes what things look like in the marketplace, and it allows all kinds of new opportunity for us.
Do you have a specific design philosophy?
The answer is yes, but we don't push it hard because the team in the office who's responsible for the execution of that project ultimately is also responsible for the approach and the design philosophy for that project. Okay. So if you looked at all the projects, they're not going to look and feel the same. And you're not going to necessarily see some overriding design philosophy, but what you are going to see is a tremendous amount of time spent listening to clients, asking great questions, and then giving them resulting projects that are a response to that process, which I think is great.
Yeah. What's the first, have you done the first international project, or we'll say outside of Canada?
We have done work outside of Canada. One of the things about our work is we can't always talk about it.
Okay.
Because we do institutional work for the most part. And so, we might do work for our federal government, or we might work for important hospitality clients, or work on airport work, where there's a Canadian need there. The client is Canadian and they want to have their standards met, but the actual location of the real property is outside of Canada. So that might be a fit for us.
Yeah.
So that kind of work we do, we have done work we've done work in Asia. we're in the midst of doing work in Europe. Yeah.
Now, some of these are massive projects.
I don't know what massive really means. I don't know. Winnipeg's.
I come from residential.
Oh, so for
so
compared to residential, they're massive.
Yeah. So these are, I mean, when people would think of, you know, big projects, I'm going to put you in the big project scope. Are there certain entities that are more difficult to deal with, like contractually, or that you guys are completely not handcuffed, but where there's less deviation allowed?
I mean, that's a great question too. Our clients, so we have in-house legal counsel.
Oh, okay.
And I would say if I have another expertise, it may be in contracts and in procurement. So
that's a good expertise
for sure. And our in-house counsel is reading through things, as am I. I typically get a briefing, even on if we're going to pursue an opportunity. Mm-hmm. I mean, you asked about international work. Let's say we've been invited to design a new embassy in another market for the government of Canada, in this case, because that's who the client is going to be.
Yep.
There might be a many hundreds page contract of general conditions and contractual obligations, which we have to read and be comfortable with, and then assess how much risk there is associated with that project and if we're going to pursue it. The larger we get, the more comfortable we are with risk, because if you're taking on 170 projects at any given time, you can take on one riskier project. I mean, our insurer doesn't like to hear that.
Yeah.
And I'm still an inherently conservative person. But it
normalizes.
It does normalize things for sure.
Interesting. So when you were coming up, was it word of mouth? Was it within the industry? Did you have to market yourself, advertise, or was it purely just, hey, we worked with you guys, they're incredible?
You're asking when we were small?
Yeah.
No one knew us. Right. No one knows you when you're small.
Right.
And then you spend your time figuring out. So I was pretty adamant on us picking our clients, not the other way around, and I'm still that way. So we're no people. Like if you called and you said, let's do a house together, I would thank you. Mm-hmm. I would say no, because we don't do that work. Then I would recommend other people, if you wanted, that I think might be a fit for you. Yeah. I might even take you for coffee and say, tell me what you're looking for. I'll practice kind of my asking and sussing out questions, and then send you in different directions, and hopefully you have success. Yeah. So we don't get much work from word of mouth. In fact, if someone reaches out to us, generally speaking, unless they're best fit, we will send them to other firms that we think are a better fit for them. And because of the kind of work we do, that makes sense. Yeah. So what we do is we look for clients who are looking for people like us and who are doing work that we think is a great fit for us. And those clients typically are using some kind of letter of interest or RFP or master services agreement. They're putting it out there publicly on a national scale, likely, but even on an international scale, and saying, this is our problem to solve, essentially, in a complicated request for proposal. And then we read through it and we see if the work is a great fit for us and if they as a client are a potential fit for us. So that's the way we acquire work. And because it's so different than what our industry generally does, especially in this market, where it might be, you're looking, when you're working in houses, people are looking at your work, they're looking at your social media, they're looking at your photographs. I like that work. I heard from that client, they did a great job. And that's, I'm assuming, how you get a lot of your work. Mm-hmm. We do not get our work that way.
Interesting. What is the most innovative project that comes to mind that you're allowed to talk about?
We work on crazy projects that I can talk about. We're designing I'll give you a few, just to give you a flavor of some of them. Mm-hmm. We're designing and have a fish hatchery. This is a salmonoid hatchery. which we think is a great fit for us, and the client felt that way as well.
Interesting.
It's in the middle of BC on a creek that you can't actually drive to. It's on Indigenous lands, but the project is going to be built by, it's going to be funded by another entity who's then going to teach the community how to use this facility. As I think in many ways, I think it's part of a reconciliation effort.
Okay.
The client only understands it from a scientific perspective. We need to raise salmon and drop them in the creeks and then populate essentially the Pacific side of the waterways with these salmon. They have no program. They have no idea what goes in the building. They have no idea. They don't know they have some money, but they don't know what it costs.
Okay.
They don't know who's going to work in it. So, I mean, they just come to us with this problem, and then we read it and we're like, oh, this is interesting. So the building will sit directly over top of the creek in the end. Mm-hmm. And we're going to design a building where they can raise salmonoid, and the salmonoid will be released directly into the stream from the building.
Almost as natural as possible.
Correct.
Right.
And so it has an office component. You're dealing with an Indigenous community who is isolated and will be using this very technical building. And so figuring out how they want to use it and how they'll be able to maintain it. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting project for us and is not that weird for us. We have way weirder. We have been asked to, we're restoring a lighthouse in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So the lighthouse sits on an island that is only inhabited by wild horses. And the only way you can get there is to tag on to essentially fishermen's boats and have them drop you close by. That's the only way you can get there. And there's this protected heritage lighthouse that our client wants us to restore.
Okay.
And the building was built in the 1800s. And they don't want to change the way it operates or its construction because all of those things are protected. So that's a project that we're doing on the heritage restoration side. Mm-hmm. And we just completed a lab building in Halifax, which was a joint effort between 3 federal departments, where all these scientists wanted a building where they could explore the effects of underwater vehicles on life within the Atlantic Ocean. I gave you a bunch of, I guess, ocean examples. Mm-hmm. Those are, I guess, we do a few of those now that I'm talking about it. And so we have literally designed a building where they can recreate parts of the Atlantic Ocean to test underwater vehicles' effect on the sea life. And this is coming from 3 totally different mandates of 3 government departments who before this didn't have a facility where they could communicate with each other and learn from each other. These things happen siloed. And the building is fascinating and weird.
It almost sounds like the more questions that are unanswered, the more likely you are to take on the project.
Correct.
Fantastic.
Right.
I thought I had problems.
We like the weird and wonderful. Like we did the alert research station in the high Arctic in the North Pole.
Yeah.
And for us, that's not weird.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it takes 24 hours to fly there, and you have to land in Greenland,
right,
to refuel because you can't make it there.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So you've been on a lot of different airplanes.
I have.
Yeah, I imagine.
I have.
How does being based out of Winnipeg affect your firm? And do you think that it would be different if you were based somewhere else?
Yes.
In what way?
Winnipeg works to our advantage in many cases. Okay. Our location in the country, right? It doesn't matter. I told you I sleep in my bed most nights. So, we did $1 billion project on Vancouver Island, and that project was in kind of center of Vancouver Island. I could literally get up and get on a plane here at 6 a.m. and have a morning meeting with you at 9 a.m. I would land and I would gain the 2 hours, and I would beat you to the office if you made the meeting at 9:30, and then still be home to sleep in my bed. So we can have conference calls with our clients. It doesn't matter if they're in St. John's, Newfoundland, or if they're in Victoria. It makes no difference really, because it really fits within our business day, and I can get anywhere quickly. I also think having the design schools here, right? We provide a lot of technical expertise in our office. Architects, there's a fairly large contingent of architects that work in our office, professional interior designers that work in our office, engineers that work in our office, a lot of technologists that are graduates of the program at Red River College. So, or I guess RRC Polytechnic at this point. Having all of those schools and resources here is nice. And then what we do is very different than what most firms here do. So if you're in this market and you're looking for the kind of experience that we offer as a firm, we can attract the right people. Whereas if we were in a very large market like Toronto, there would be more firms that we would be competing against that do the kind of work that we do. Whereas we're different on a good day. We're definitely an outlier in Winnipeg, we think. I think another thing is you have street cred when you come from Winnipeg, which is weird. So clients are like, we have this really technical problem, and then, you know, the whole envelope of the skyscraper leaks, and it's windy here, and it rains, and then we get snow. And then, you know, we'll go to the interview and they're like, oh, you're from Winnipeg.
So you understand,
you have street
extremes.
cred, right? Like, you know what Winnipeg's reputation is outside of Winnipeg.
Yeah.
So people are like, oh, well, if you've done that there, you can do that here. And we forget that sometimes, but when you go into another market, you have that Winnipeg street cred when it comes to dealing with building problems.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh yeah.
I've seen a lot of content from guys either in very, very hot climates building or very, very cold climates building. I'm like, yeah, but put those together.
Exactly.
Guys. Come on, try that.
One building dealing with both.
That's right.
And the wind blowing at 100K.
Yeah. That made some interesting projects.
For sure.
It's actually changed a lot of even how our site layout, like just our stuff, how our site, like the wind is just, it will ruin your life if your material isn't, you know, in the right spot.
Absolutely.
Protected and all that. What is it? Is there anything in particular that when you talk about Winnipeg, if someone was coming to town, that you absolutely love about Winnipeg? And then we're going to go the inverse. Is there anything that not so much?
Things I love about Winnipeg. There's something very real about this place. I don't know. I find when I'm going to other markets, and maybe because I'm dropped into those markets, but I feel like people are often putting on a show. They're talking about things that maybe they have deep knowledge on, but it doesn't necessarily feel that way. I feel like people are they are who they are. There's something very real about the people here, which I really like. And I do like living here a lot. If you're asking me if it's to, you know, when we have visitors come and we're showing off the city, and we do that a fair amount because our clients will come to us, and we did do that this week. In fact, our entire client group came from 4 different markets. And because we were in Winnipeg, they were like, we're going to come to you because you're centrally located. And we ended up touring them the city. And so we showed them the Forks and the Human Rights Museum and the addition at the WAG. And we took them for different meals, and they thought the place was magic. And so I think this city does have all kinds of pockets of magic for sure.
Yeah.
What do I like least about it? I don't know.
What would you change about Winnipeg?
I wish Winnipeg was a little more entrepreneurial. Not that there are tons of ambitious people in Winnipeg, and there are, but I want that to continue to spread to more, because I think we have a lot of great people here, and there's tremendous opportunity here. And so I'd like to see kind of more of that entrepreneurial spirit bleed into more parts of the city.
Do you think that Winnipeg has shaped your perspective either personally or professionally in the way that you operate?
100%. How could it not have? I mean, I went to school in Berlin a bit, but I've grown up here. I grew up in the North End, essentially, I've lived in.
So you do have street cred.
I don't have street cred. I don't actually have any street cred, but how could it not have shaped me? I'm a product of this city, and I like that a lot. Winnipeg's kind of isolation can lend to less perspective sometimes. And so because of my job, I'm dropped into other markets for a day or two. And so, I get this different perspective for 24 hours and then I come back here.
Yeah.
And I hear people talking about things in other markets they don't talk about here, or people doing things that they don't do here. And I find that I'm constantly impressed with Winnipeggers. Like, I think it's actually a great place with great people. But it can be slow to adapt. Yeah. And so often you'll hear something happen in another market and eventually gets here.
I hear that often, that comparison to the United States to Canada is where, 5 to 10 years behind them on any given subject. Do you find that that's the case at all in your industry, or we're so connected and you're so into it that do you find that there's any lag behind any other industry or locations, I should say?
I don't know. Maybe we're a very progressive office, almost to a fault. Like we'll be an early adopter for something on the technical side for sure, which is
so it could be good or bad.
It can be good or bad. Yep. But I think we're very good at walking away from things that don't work. And so we'll spend a lot of time kind of vetting that new thing that's happening and trying it and then seeing if it works for us. So I think on the technical side, I was just in Washington, D.C. for a meeting last week, looking at the AIA convention, looking at a bunch of very progressive things. And I'm like, oh, we already do this. And so, I don't know. I think on the tech side, we're not lagging behind at all. I can only speak for us as a firm.
Yep.
In the software that we use, in the way we communicate, I think we're pretty progressive there, and I think we're pushing some boundaries.
Now on the personal side a little bit, you have decided to join back in 2010 what we call the trifecta of insanity. Now, I don't know if you had kids at that time, but married, entrepreneur, and then throw some kids in the mix.
Well, I can top that actually. So I always know the age of my firm because it's the same month my oldest was born.
Oh boy.
So I didn't tell you that before. So yes, I'm married with 2 children.
Yeah.
And my wife was pregnant when I started Republic, which we knew. And I think in many ways that helped push me because I was like, oh, life is it's moving along.
Yeah.
And so if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it now. And so it's a bit of a blur, the starting of Republic.
I imagine so, yes.
So, yes, married, was, fairly recently married. We've been married for about a year or 2. We were married for 2 years, basically, almost 3. And then my wife, Lila, was pregnant with our son, Cohen. And I started the business at the same time. And I told you that story about landing all 3 projects. And so then my son was born about 3 weeks after that. So landed 3 projects, had a baby, started a new business all at the same time. So now people think I'm actually pretty chill about stuff, but I'm like,
I've seen worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very fair. So how are you able to, other than, coffee and as much sleep as you were allowed to get, are you a routine person at all? Habits? Is there anything in particular that you are married to?
As I've gotten older, I like more routine. I like having less. I've definitely simplified my life in some ways. Like if you open my closet, for example, I have about 3 feet of space, and that's all I wear and have. That's it.
That's easier. Yep.
It's great, actually. I never prioritized exercise when I was young, though I do now. So I have to work out every day. And by workout, like we have a trainer on staff in our office.
Okay.
So that makes it easy. I can just roll out of bed, and we have a fixed time 3 times a week, and I just work out at the firm, which is great. But I like to bike to work on the other days or run to work, so that I never did this before, but I need that in my routine now. I feel sluggish otherwise. Otherwise, I've given up having a desk, so I don't have a desk or an office anymore. And I sit in a different place every day, and I think that's really healthy for me. It keeps my perspective fresh all the time.
Nice. And
I don't have a lot of, with age, I've eliminated kind of many bad habits. Not that I was one that had a ton of them, but
yeah,
I don't have time for bad habits. I don't know.
I understand. I get it. Everything's tougher with bad habits.
For sure.
Everything productive is tougher with bad habits.
For sure.
Yeah. Who would you say, I'll say who, what, or where have been the biggest influences on not only your architecture, but just you as a person? What are the biggest influences that you would say in your life?
For sure, my wife. For sure, in my case, we got married. We've been together 24 years, so it's actually a long time.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So we've been together 24 years, and so we've grown up together. Mm-hmm. And she's a kind of wonderful. She keeps things in perspective for me, which is great. So she's had hardly the largest influence on my life over the last number of years. Though I also grew up in a wonderful family. My parents have had a strong influence on me. When I was a greener architect, I wanted a mentor. I really wanted to have a mentor. Mm-hmm. And I reached out to other architects who I thought were nice people or smart or had accomplished things. And generally speaking, people would be like, well, that's an odd request, which I thought was really weird. And in fact, I never landed a mentor because they saw you as a future competitor. And so one of the things that I do now is I spend a tremendous amount of time mentoring other architects. And most of them work for my competition. I don't care. And I get a tremendous amount out of that. Mm-hmm. I find it really fulfilling. So I think our industry could do a much better job of mentoring young architects or young designers. And I find it very fulfilling.
Do you find that having a family full of educators helps play into your desire to help educate?
I never thought of that, but probably.
And not only that, you're very well spoken. You've got great energy. And I imagine that you've kind of been around that. Like teachers always have to communicate their ideas, of course, right? Yeah.
Of course. You're probably right in that assumption. I think you're probably right. Like I never said, like I was going to go to university. I knew that when I was in kindergarten, not because my parents said to me, you're going to university, not at all. But I had been surrounded by people who are highly educated. Mm-hmm. Both of my parents are highly educated and they don't come from anything. Mm. And actually my entire extended family is that way as well. So I think education was always a priority, not sit down and do homework. Actually, my parents have a very positive approach to education. And my children are very disciplined students, which especially my oldest, my wife and I encourage him to go out and play more as opposed to and study less. Mm. Because
how old is Colin now?
He's 14.
Okay.
And he's in junior high school, he's in middle school. He's about to finish middle school. And so what does, you don't need to continue to study this. You don't have to get 100% on this exam. We're proud of you. You're doing wonderful things, mm-hmm. but you can go and hang out with your friends and get ice cream instead. So we have some work to do there. I think
Problems. Good problems.
It's good
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
I think he thinks I don't know what I'm talking about. Though
That's fair.
I have so much in common with both of my children that I kind of get them both. So I'm like, I've done it once already. Not exactly the same, but I'm not just a dad who doesn't get you.
Yeah. So you mentioned the mentoring side. What would be your advice to, say, random 18-year-old? I won't say necessarily heading or wanting to be an architect, but just, based on the lessons, some of the landmines, your experiences, what are some of the biggest lessons that you would try and shape their decisions?
Is any student who wants to, they're not even wanting to go into architecture necessarily. Oh, I think, I find it interesting when I meet young people with a blueprint for what they're going to do. I'm going to be a dentist. I'm like, you're 9. How do you know? How do you know this? Do you know any dentists? No. Okay.
Cool.
I think, have an open mind. I think you can have you can design your career as you're figuring it out. I didn't know I wanted to be an architect till I was 20. And even then I wasn't sure. And so I think having an open mind and exposing yourself to as much as you can in terms of learning is key. And then once you've jumped into something, I'm going to go into fine arts because I have an interest in that. Give it your all when you're there. Don't decide halfway through a term, this isn't for me. You don't have to prove anything to anybody else. Just go and give it your all. I would have approached my education differently with what I know now, and I guess that's just part of growing up. But I would have been more engaged in the moment of the courses that I was taking, whether I was in physics or I was in zoology or I was in architecture, because it's less about getting it done now. More about enjoy that journey a little bit more. You'll get way more out of it. I could have gotten way more out of it than I did.
When you say that, it reminds me of one of my coaches once told me, how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Yeah.
And to me, when I incorporate that I once heard the cure for boredom is curiosity. And we can put even focus and into there, because my 10-year-old son has mentioned boredom a lot. I'm bored, I'm bored. And so it started my wife and I talking and thinking about it, and just what is the opposite? What is the cure for boredom? And when I think about myself, it's when I've really focused and given my all to whatever I'm doing at the time, regardless of what it is.
Absolutely.
Knitting
doesn't matter.
How do I do this better? What is this? And asking questions. I was never a big question man. I would just go along with stuff, and I'd, if something was silly or I really had questions about it, I'd ask. But lately, a lot of asking questions, and especially trying new things. Like I learned squash at 38,
right?
And I got demolished by a 75-year-old man who made fun of me the whole time. I just recently started jujitsu.
Oh, wow. Good for you.
And asking questions and taking things in and trying to understand the chess game that it is, how it's not really, it is physical, but it's more mental, right? I love that's your advice. Outside of architecture, what's kind of stuff that you like to fill your time with?
Younger Shane used to like to tinker. So I feel like I'm a bit of an engineer at my core. I actually like to take stuff apart and build stuff. I don't really do any of that anymore, mostly because I don't think I have the time. And I probably would just be able to tinker with it, and then I'd have to walk from it for a month. Though I feel like if I can find more time in the day or reinvent a time machine, I will tinker.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy travel a lot for leisure. And so we'll be disappearing this week. And so the four of us are going to Spain and Croatia and France. We travel a lot as a family. Sometimes it's just 4-day trips. I mean, my children travel like business people, and they did since they were little. Like if I said to them tonight, tomorrow we're getting on a plane and we're going to Nashville for 4 days, they would just pack up their suitcases and they would walk through the airport like business people. Like it wouldn't even faze them. And then we go and we experience new things together. I love that kind of dedicated time where we can all unplug and do new things together is wonderful.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Oh yeah, so traveling, eating, of course.
How do you separate your business travel from your personal travel?
Oh,
how do you not have a disdain for travel if you're traveling so much with business?
I don't disdain travel, so I don't hate it, and I travel fairly well. Like the airlines treat me well, and I sit and work like I'm in a car. Like I don't notice anything.
Yeah.
I don't get phased too much by it. Like if I had to I do work on the plane like I'm working at my office. I don't, on the random time when I've been stranded for weather, I'm still just sitting in the airport working.
Yeah.
I don't notice it. So I don't have disdain for work travel. I just have no love for it either. It's just part of the job. But leisure travel, I love. I love it. And somehow I'm good at separating when I'm working from when I'm not. Like I can work from, say this out. In theory, I can work from home.
Theoretically.
I can, but I don't like working from home because home is my home time.
Yeah.
So I want to go to my office or a third space when I'm working. And that way when I'm at home, I'm 100% at home. I'm not thinking about work because if I am, it creates this gray area where I've got this work mindset in my own home, and I don't like that at all. So for me, work is work and home is home.
Yeah.
And I'm the same with travel. Leisure travel, I'd be going to the same market that I would be going to for work travel. I wouldn't even
totally.
Like I had a meeting in Montreal last week, and I could have the same. I mean, I'm going to Montreal on Saturday with my wife and kids, and I won't feel like it's the same experience. I won't even associate it with being the same thing.
Yeah. Well,
there's a clear switch there.
Yeah. You mentioned tinkering. My dad's a tinkerer, and I loved it. My dad took apart remember the old iPods? The first ones? Mine stopped working. He took it apart, fixed it.
It's amazing though, isn't it?
How to fix an iPod. He's like, how do you not?
But you don't know how to fix it, but you take it apart and you kind of figure it out and then you put it back together.
Yeah.
I think you learn a lot that way too.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all problem solving. Like I like problem solving. So I'll give you these examples. Like I guess I'm in sales because clients come to me and they're like, we have a problem. We need a building. Sometimes they know nothing. So it's just you're asking questions and you end up with this kind of kit of parts when you're putting a proposal together or even on the design problem. We want to use this and we don't want to have that and must do this and this has to be connected to that. And so it ends up being all of these problems that you're solving for people, or you're solving problems when you're tinkering with stuff.
Mm-hmm. Sales really is problem and then the possibility of what can happen, and here's the path we're going to take to get there, right? And so it's definitely something. I'm not natural at it, so I had to learn it, and I'm still haven't perfected it by any means. And I think that anyone that comes naturally to is just absolutely gifted.
I would argue that you're a good salesperson. You're a much better salesperson than I am. My strength is that I know enough to be dangerous. I know enough about I know enough about my clients. I know enough about how to put a building together, enough about a specification. I know enough about everything related to practice that I can direct the right people to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Really. Like I know someone who has deeper knowledge of every single part of practice than I do, but only in 1 or 2 or 3 areas. So, my sales game is that I just know enough.
Well, I think that lends itself to a great CEO, a great operator, a great manager, right? You're managing the orchestra.
Right. You direct.
Yep. Yeah, that's fantastic. You knew that you were coming here. I didn't give you any questions. I didn't prep you at all. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't?
I actually think you're an excellent interviewer.
Thank you.
Excellent interviewer. I've done lots of these. I had a fireside chat with the dean at the school this last couple weeks ago. She's also a very good interviewer. I think you asked great questions. I'm not sure that there's anything that I would have had on my list that you didn't ask.
Well, you've been fantastic here, and I really appreciate that. I think you're a phenomenal communicator. And so anyone that gets to spend time with you and learning from you, I imagine absolutely gets a lot of value from it. So I know you're busy. I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm glad I could catch you in between the puddle jumping.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
So excited to continue hearing about how big the firm is getting and the cool projects that you guys are doing. How would people find you? How would they kind of see what you guys are doing?
I mean, you can always go on our website, which is republicarchitecture.ca. We have a very transparent building here, and I think we're a very transparent team. So you can come by our building at 385 St. Mary across the convention center. It's essentially a glass box. So even if you don't want to come in the door, you can see what we're doing.
Yeah, very fair.
There's basically no walls and it's just glass. So you can always see us at work. And we have I have a standing invitation to anybody who wants to learn. So anyone can shadow me for the day. And I do this with students all the time. And so I would say a couple times a month, I'll have a student who typically I don't know them, whether they're a high school student or a university student, and they can just come shadow me or anybody else at the office.
Wow.
Oh yeah, that's a standing.
That's fantastic.
How do you know what a designer does otherwise? How do you know what an architect actually does? How do you know what an interior designer actually does? And maybe you might know an interior designer because you met them because they worked on your parents' house. Mm-hmm. But how do you know one that does office fit ups for the, or does hospitality fit ups in an airport? Like, you don't meet those people across the table necessarily. Yep. And you might have an idea of what those people do from watching TV, but the reality of it is totally different.
Yeah.
And so we're always happy to have people come and see what we do and ask questions. Yeah. We like that a lot, actually.
The first thought that comes to my head was people would be so bored shadowing me for a day.
I don't know.
They would just be so bored. That's why I try to make content like for YouTube and Instagram and about the buildings we do. I think they'd be bored. But then again, my wife gets mad at me because she's like, this is the stuff that people want to see. And it's just old hat to you and you don't think to share it.
Of course. It's, you see it every day. So for you, it's not interesting anymore. Mm-hmm. But for someone who has no idea what you do in your day, I suspect if I followed you around, I'd find your day interesting.
I don't know.
Well, maybe hopefully one day you'd find mine interesting.
Yeah. Well, I definitely feel that reciprocally. Thank you so much. I know you're busy and I really appreciate that. Come back anytime.
Thanks again.